Welcome, welcome, welcome. Um, Welcome to the Nile Book Club presents African Page Turners. Woo! Yes, thank you, thank you. My name is Kalungi Sebandeke.
And I'm Katasi Kironde. And we are
The Nile Book Club. And of course, and this is African Page Turners. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Nile Book Club?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started the Nile Book Club towards the end of the pandemic in 2020, and we really just wanted to read works by African writers and African-inspired texts. That means anyone who's writing about Africa, and strictly fiction, I would say. And we read anything from Achebe to Makumbi, and of course most
Yes, Pillar proofs. The young African page turner proofs.
And everything from Achebe to Makumbi.
Absolutely, yeah. So today is a very, very special day, and we want to thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. You are our first face-to-face event audience, and a special thank you, of course, to Second Home Holland Park, Spitalfields, Libreria, everyone from the whole team, from Lloyd, India, K-Win. So give them a special round of applause. Yes, thank you so much. Yes, nice cheer.
And this event wouldn't have been made possible without support from the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. We were able to secure a grant for their Black History Month program. And we normally meet on the last Sunday of the month online. So it's really nice to meet face-to-face and just see people in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of real life, let's talk about social media. So if you can just tweet about this event, the hashtag is African Page Turners, and we are Nile Book Club on Twitter, at Nile Book Club, and The Nile Book Club on Instagram. So we're very unique. It's a unique handle. You're not really going to find many people out there with it. So please do tweet about it, because the more social media interaction we have, the more excited Kensington and Chelsea, the borough, will support us next year. So please do tweet about it either during or after. And of course, follow us on the social medias, the Nile Book Club on Instagram and Nile Book Club Twitter, and of course, any other social media, YouTube, everything. So without further ado, let us give you the order of events. We shall start with a reading from
none other than Kalungi.
Yes.
Kalungi's going to read from his manuscript. He's going to give us a taster of Kabuye, the boy revolutionary.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's going to warm us up, and
then after that, we will welcome our special guest author, Onyi Nwabineli. Round of applause for her, please. Thank you so much. Yes. So, who's right here?
Who's actually in the house?
Yeah, she's in the house. So, Onyi Nwabineli is the author of a debut book, Someday, Maybe. A brilliantly written book, witty, funny, but of course dealing with a very important but unfortunately heartbreaking subject matter, and she does it in such an incredible way. And we will be speaking to her and getting a reading from her, and you yourself will be able to ask her any burning questions that you may have, either about the book if you've read it, or just any general kind of questions you may have about writing.
So we're going to hear from Kalungi, who's going to be reading from Kabuye, the boy revolutionary, and there'll be time for questions and answers. So let's give Kalungi a round of applause.
Kabuye is 8 years old and has big plans. One of those plans is to kill the president. With the help of his fun-loving friend John Vianney and once arch-nemesis Sebunya, he sets into motion a series of events that will see him change the trajectory of his country forever. So he hopes. Chapter 1. He's never fired a gun before. But today, of all days, he decides that the first bullet he fires should hit the most powerful man in the country. A man who had made many promises, and 10 years later, they hadn't materialized. He didn't want to grow to be 31 years old and still be led by a long-running president. He imagined what would become. The imminent corruption made possible by apathetic supporters of the president. The rigged elections carried out in broad daylight with so-called independent observers looking on helplessly. The opposition leaders gently reminded to stay in their place. Even at 8 years old, Kabuye knew that it was more humane to starve a young serpent of life before it goes on to swallow a wandering baby. The president was this youthful serpent, young in his crimes, not yet fully developed and yet undoubtedly poised for great crimes against humanity. And Kabuye, his fellow countrymen and women, were these wandering babies, crawling unaware in their parents' vast compound, exploring only to be devoured by a ravenous snake in the grass. Kabuye couldn't let that happen. He had put himself forward as the leader of the revolution, and many times leaders had to do the unthinkable. He paused, gun heavy in his tiny hands. The president declared himself a leader of a revolution too. He too had to do the unthinkable. Was Kabuye any different to this man he was momentarily about to kill? He, after all, was the only one, along with his comrades, his uncle included, brave enough to take on a returning dictator. He and his bushwalk comrades braved a rainfall of bullets in order to liberate their country. His own uncle came close to death. Kabuye remembers the story, how his uncle and two of his fellow rebels were ambushed in a remote area. His uncle hit in the right leg, begging to be left to die, but lifted to safety by his much smaller comrades who struggled with their hefty victim. Bullets are no joke, Kabuye thought. But if not fired right, like his uncle, the victim could survive. And then what? With a dead president, a revolution could begin. But with a merely maimed president, a torturous prison sentence was guaranteed. Did Kabuye really think he could carry this out? Who would take over from the president? His uncle? But he wasn't a politician, just a soldier with little to no political support. Did it matter? Or wasn't it said for it to be more beneficial to have the backing of the army than a bunch of disposable MPs? Another much caricatured dictator proved this when he dragged a dissenting lawyer from parliament and had him taught a lesson. A lesson that meant that said lawyer hasn't been heard from or seen ever again. It appeared that Kabuye's ill-thought-out plan was exactly that. Ill thought out. Can an 8-year-old really kill a dictator? And could that 8-year-old go on to inspire a positive change in leadership? Or would another dictator take his place like some sort of revolving door of corrupt leaders? After all, that was all his people knew. Strong man after strong man. And any decent leaders were lifted from their seats by indecent men who did indecent things to them to discourage any honorable leaders from coming forward. It was said that this was so prominent in Africa. Was this why a continent so rich in resources was painfully poor? Kabuye no longer wanted to ask questions, but simply fire out solutions and hope for the best. And today, with a gun in his hand, he was about to aim for the stars and hopefully hit the president. Thank you.
My first question is, what inspired you to write about Kabuye?
Well, first of all, the genesis of this book started during the lockdown. So I set myself a task to write freehand without typing out 20 pages a day. And I did that for about 2 weeks, and then I had something there. And the inspiration behind it was just my mischievous childhood in Uganda. I didn't have any ambitions to kill anyone. But I was a bit, I went to boarding school, many boarding schools. And I just remember one particular boarding school, Kaboja. If you're Ugandan, you know it's a tough school to go to. It's an old boys school. And whilst I was there, it was terrible that we used to get beaten for ridiculous things like speaking our own language. We couldn't even cry in our own language. We had to go, ouch, we couldn't go, you know what I mean? So it was so tough that I really couldn't handle it. So I pretended to faint and, I was taken out of the school. So I thought that would be a nice little beginning of a story, a young, mischievous, by all means necessary kind of young boy to inspire a revolution.
Okay. In terms of the theme, right? So Africa's often associated with coups, dictators. Why was that something you wanted to write about?
Yeah, of course. I think that's something that's very prevalent in a lot of African literature. But I think, obviously, currently our situation in Uganda, in that we've had the same president for 36 years. And of course, it's dangerous to even sometimes talk about it. But I think that's one reason why we should talk about it. There's brave people like, Bobby Wine, who's a musician turned politician, who decided to take on the president as well. There's, people like Dr. Chiza Besigye, who's taken on the president multiple times, to no avail. So I think they're brave people, and I just think, why not be brave and just do that and write about it, but from a different point of view, from a young boy's point of view, as opposed to maybe sometimes a few times it's been written through the perspective of maybe an older person, or maybe dealing with kind of something like Beast of No Nation, which is a great book, but dealing with rebel soldiers and seeing it from a young rebel soldier. Kabuye is so-called middle class. Is he has both his parents. So I just wanted to take that angle instead.
And I think it makes sense because we for those that don't know, Uganda's population is actually very young. So sort of hearing from young voices is quite pertinent. And I think in the diaspora, if you have that privilege, you're not going to be hunted down by the government. It's really important to use your privilege.
Yeah.
Does anyone want to ask like one or two questions before we go into our next part? Okay, so James has asked the names of the characters. Did you pick Ngeye clan names and specifically and why? Yeah.
Yeah, reason I picked Ngeye clan name is because myself, I'm part of the Ngeye clan. So in Uganda, we have these totems. At least I can speak from the Buganda point of view, where you're given a clan name. So I was given a clan name Kalungi. So I chose Kabuye because obviously that's something I can confidently write about. Now there might be similarities within the clans, but I just I wanted to put that forward because I understood that a little bit more. Yeah, but we do have characters from different tribes and different clans within that.
Fantastic.
Well. Yeah.
Aisha?
Yeah, I was just quite curious about the age. I don't understand you talk about you being young and think, but 8. I just want to know around age 8, like what's goes through a child's mind at that time. That's what I want to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Aisha's asked about the age and why did you choose an 8-year-old and how understanding their mind at that age.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, I think one of the great things about literature is that just the imagination. So you can put characters you wouldn't necessarily associate in a particular situation into that situation. And I just wanted to challenge myself and present this character who goes on these incredible intellectual adventures, but as well as, perilous adventures as well. And I think it just makes it a little bit unique. I mentioned, Beast of No Nation, of course, famously, that's a young child who ends up part of a rebel army, and various other stories that have had young characters, of course, famously Harry Potter, he was 10 years old, and of course that's to do with, witches and wizards. So I just wanted to present that young man who's so annoyingly intelligent in my book.
Okay, and just before we leave it there, where can people find out about the rest of this book, or how can they support you in completing it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm always in the look of in the search of publishers who are interested, or an agent who can help me kind of shop it around, or an editor, someone could help me to hone it. So yeah, I mean, if anyone's interested, of course, or knows someone interested, feel free to get in touch. You can find me at Kalungi Fresh, Kalungi Fresh on IG, as well as Kalungi _ on Twitter. Welcome back to the Nile Book Club presents African Page Turners. We are joined by a very special guest, Onyi Nwabineli. Round of applause. Now, Onyi Nwabineli is the author of Someday Maybe. And before we get into questions and a little bit of the inspiration behind the book, Onyi is going to read a nice little passage from the book, so we'll give her the floor. Okay.
I'm going to read from quite a touching section that a few people have fed back to me. So just to give a little bit of context, in dealing with her grief, Eve's family, particularly her parents, have finally come to the point where they are encouraging her to go and seek counselling. So, I lift my head from his shoulder. Since when do you believe in counselling? I remember the advice shouted by sweating pastors from the pulpit on Sunday mornings. Pray. Whatever it is you are facing, God is the answer. Your salvation does not lie in the words of men. It's how we were raised. When Ma and Dad received a letter from the Home Office questioning their right to remain in the UK, they fasted for 7 days. When Uncle Osinachi developed a mass on the side of his neck, he refused to get checked out. Dad summoned a prayer circle so prolific the house smelled of Old Spice and Dax for weeks afterwards. Our house was filled with the pleas of the pious as they beseeched God to remove the mass, and if not that, then Uncle's stubbornness. I can't recall having brought a problem to my parents, and that same problem not being added to the intercession during nightly prayers. To hear them now advocating for me to take my issues outside of us and outside of God turns my mouth so dry, tumbleweed drifts across my tongue. Look at you, Q, changing the staunch opinions of my parents. Who would have thought? You continue to stare at your photograph of a foot, Ma adds, pulling sheet from under the pillow. I can't understand it. And you don't want to talk to us. You don't want to eat again. You and your sister are at odds. You don't even want to watch Guy Fieri. What Quentin did was terrible. You are right to mourn, but Shibi, you also have to live. You've stopped living.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Onyi. So would you be able to basically just tell us a little bit where you got the inspiration for the book?
So the book is kind of a labor of love. It's kind of a love letter to one of my good friends who went through a similar kind of bereavement. And all that she requested from me was I write about grief, which I didn't really know how to do outside of my own kind of journal scribblings. But she bullied me into it. So I did write about grief for her. And it wasn't a novel. It didn't have a plot, no characters. It was just kind of like a stream of consciousness. But she loved it and encouraged me, again, bullied me to turn it into some kind of plot and come up with characters. And I didn't want to. I always wanted to write a book, but this is not the book that I wanted to write at first. But I did it, and here we are.
Nice. Brilliant. And I just wanted to say before we get into other questions as well, very briefly, that I really enjoyed reading this book because I didn't know what to expect. Of course, in the blurb and as you told us in the synopsis, it deals with, a very, very difficult circumstance. So I thought, it was going to be dealt in a very heavy kind of way. And of course, there are very poignant and respectful and brilliantly written moments, but there's a lot of wit and humor in that. So I think for me, I just want to congratulate you as well, for writing a really, really brilliant book.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah.
So on that point, before I start, I enjoyed reading your book, and I've never experienced grief in that way. So it was really touching to follow Eve's journey. So just for the audience, Eve is the main character, and the book's about her loss of her husband who's committed suicide. And we follow her for like 339 pages in that grief. And I think at times I just actually wanted to rush through it to just end that kind of that pain. But like Kalungi said, those the lighter moments and the humor just made it somewhat like really balanced in terms of reading it. How were you able to identify moments of joy or like humor?
Black people have a fantastic way of making jokes out of like the heaviest moments. It's humor is how we deal with a lot of stuff that's laid at our feet, and just in the diaspora, and especially in like African and Nigerian households, when someone dies, we have a celebration of life as well as a memorial service and a funeral and so on, where we come together and we do laugh and we reminisce and we just celebrate that person. So, and grief and suicide and mental health, they are such heavy subjects, as you said. And while I didn't want to, my main aim was not to rush away from grief and get to the better, I still wanted to add some joy and some levity into this because A, it reflects real life, and B, I wanted to give people a little bit of a break now and then. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually on that point, when you look at Aspen is Eve's mother-in-law. Her mourning process is very different to Eve's.
Yeah.
Was that like maybe an attempt to talk about like Igbo culture and how it differs from English culture when it comes to mourning, and the support she had around her as well?
Yeah, I think Aspen, she doesn't have any redeeming qualities really, but she grieves very differently, and I think part of that is because she's very isolated. Again, in our culture, death is a time where you all come together to support each other and to lift each other up and help each other through a difficult time. And Aspen just didn't have that. And I think part of her loneliness turned a bit more into poison, and she just wanted to inflict that pain that she was feeling on somebody else. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to also kind of say, I really enjoyed reading Battersea and South London in there, because we read a few books set in South London, and Battersea always makes an appearance, and having grown up in Battersea, it was really nice to see that, hear about Lavender Hill and all that stuff as well. So you talked about obviously the comedy in the novel, but how did you kind of find ways to deal with the kind of heavier moments for your own mental health?
I just left it alone for months at a time. I just left it alone when it got a bit too much, or I felt like I was struggling, because it took me a very long time to write. And in that time, I suffered my own bereavement. So, I could pour some of that into the book, but I really had to just take a step back from it in times and not force myself to continue writing when it felt like too much. So yeah, I gave myself long breaks when writing it. So yeah.
Only how long did the book take you to write?
About 6 years. But I don't want anyone to be discouraged. When I say it took long breaks, some of those breaks were like a year. So yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think when I heard 6 years, I was like, well, is that how long it's going to take me to finish my book? So I'm an actor. Maybe you would have noticed. And I've just finished playing Othello, right? And so I did notice some Shakespearean influences, in particular, Beast with two backs, right? Yeah. So if you're not familiar with Shakespeare, that's a...
listen, I can't remember.
It's a euphemism for...
It's a euphemism for sex.
Yes, exactly. So, I wanted you to say. But so, were there any kind of Shakespearean influences? Because even in the writing, there was a few asides. There was the literary version of asides, and that's the parenthesis. Yeah. Did you have some Shakespearean influences in that?
Probably unconsciously. I didn't think about it while I was writing it. But reading it back, I probably, have sprinkled a few things in there, but I don't think it was a conscious decision of mine to do that. So,
Yeah, and to add to that very briefly, like you had a lot of beautiful prose in that. So there was one incredible sentence that, if I could draw from my phone, I probably would to read it out, but I won't do that. But so it was beautifully structured and took me on this journey. And I think as well, something I noticed that the book, this isn't a spoiler, but the book is split up in parts, right? Yeah. So there's, I believe, home,
away, and then home again.
And then home again. And I noticed that the chapters in home and home again were kind of a little bit shorter, whereas far away was kind of, you toyed with longer chapters. Yeah. Was that some sort of conscious decision to reflect how Eve was feeling?
Yeah, so in the home and the home again, Eve is with her family a lot of the time and with her friends, her best friends, when she's at home. And it's kind of like they want her to get better and they're trying to push her through this whole grieving period to be like, yeah, we get it, you're sad. And, we loved him too in the best way that we could, but you need to come out of this. You need to stop, putting one foot in front of the other. And when she's away, she's really just by herself and she's alone with her thoughts and her feelings and her grief. And so she has the time to probably fall apart in the way that she wants to completely. So, I think I just wanted, when she was away, for the writing and how she moved through that section to be reflected in how long the chapters were. So, yeah.
So just on the subject of Eve, she's quite bougie. Like, she's very privileged. Her family live in Hampstead. I was just intrigued how you came up with just like her identity beyond her mourning and why it was important to have that kind of character.
I think Eve, she's comfortably middle class. Both her parents are doctors, and she's done pretty well for herself in her weird little career. And I think it's emblematic of a lot of our families across the diaspora. We might not have started out that way, when our parents immigrated over here, and I was born back in Nigeria and immigrated here when I was 3. And, we started out in a completely different way and worked our way up there, which is why I tried to reflect that in some of the earlier chapters about where she came from and where her family came from. But I wanted it, again, without giving away too many spoilers, Aspen's reaction to Eve and her family, I wanted it to be very clear what the problem was. And that for a lot of us navigating society, it really doesn't matter how far we've come, that will not overcome, racism. And
Still not good enough.
so, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, let's open the floor up to the lovely audience. If you've got any questions, of course, please do project, but we will relay the questions back. So yes, does anyone have any questions around the book, Onyi's writing, or just perhaps writing in general? Yes, James.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about some of the evil customs involved in mourning and funerals, because I've heard through the grapevine from different people, there can be some negative aspects in the culture. For example, when bereavement happens, the family who have lost the person have to start sort of presenting for other people.
Yeah.
So you have get-together, but it's almost like you're serving other people when you're supposed to be grieving.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, did any of that come into the story that you read?
So James asked about the Igbo customs around bereavement, and he gave a kind of pretty specific example.
So, some, but it was more light touch because Quentin is not Igbo at all. He's not Black, he's not African. So, and in balancing what he wanted against what Eve wanted, against what Aspen would have wanted, I had to be very careful that I didn't impose that, Igbo culture on somebody that wasn't Igbo. But at the same time, there are things there. I've made mention of when she speaks to her grandma. It's alluded to that, one of the old traditions in Igbo when you've lost somebody is for the widow to cut or shave her head. And it's not done all the time now. Some people still adhere to that customs, but I made it very clear that it's something that Eve didn't do because it's not what Quentin would have wanted, and her grandma didn't do the same either because it's not what her late husband would have wanted. So yeah, there are some heavier aspects of it, but I didn't go into too much detail about funeral rites in Igbo custom in this. Okay.
Amazing. Any other questions? Yes.
Rena.
Should we?
Let's ask you, Rena.
Yes.
Okay, hi. Thank you. I really enjoyed the book. I just wondered what kind of research you did in terms of just talking about Igbo culture, but just looking at some of the Igbo words that you put in there. I don't know your background, but how much research did you have to do to kind of get some of those Igbo cultural references into the book, whether it's language or culture?
So for the purpose of the camera, the question was the research that Onyi you made in regards to Igbo customs and culture, in particular language, and Urena noticed certain words, and she just wanted to know the level of research you've done.
Well, I'm quite fortunate because even though I wouldn't call myself a native speaker, my parents, particularly my dad, did teach us and instill and speaks to us still. And so my first point of reference was him for everything, language and customs, and then my mom for other things such as like wedding traditions, traditional long custom, food, those kind of things. I grew up in this culture and it's very much part of me, but I wanted to be sure when I was referencing things that people that really, really grew up and were brought up from years ago in this Igbo customs and culture, I was getting it as right as I could, and they seem to be quite proud and happy that I've got things right. So that's, yeah.
Rena, did she get things right?
Yeah, as far as I know.
As far as good.
Bankole had a question.
I did. Congratulations on
Thank you.
Just interested, you touched on this wasn't the book that you wanted to write.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just really curious, what was the book you wanted to write and have you since written it?
I've written about 3 books that will never see the light of day. The one I wanted to write was a very fluffy love romance story. This is a love story. It's not fluffy, and it's not particularly light all the time, but that's what I had set out to write. And I probably will write something like that at some point in my career, but that was what I wanted to write first, and that's not this. So, yeah.
Okay. Yes, question.
I just wondered, like, what you would say you've learned in writing the book and spending so much time with these subjects about mental health and bereavement.
Yeah, so for both, the answer to both those is that it's different for everybody, and there's no right and there's no wrong way to deal with loss and to deal with grief. I think we're very much living in a society where it's kind of like, we get like, 2 days compassionate leave when someone like we love passes away. I hate that. And I very much, and I wanted Eve to be someone who just completely rejects that out of hand and be like, no, actually, I have this gaping hole inside me, and 2 days is not enough. 2 months is not enough. I don't think I will ever get over this, because that's how we feel a lot of the time. And some people don't feel like that. Some people are like, I'm going to give myself a week to sob and, scream and eat ice cream, and then I'll be okay after that. Some people are like, I need to talk to someone immediately. So there's elements of those things throughout the novel, but I just wanted to reinforce that grieving, number one, it's not linear, and it will always hurt, but it won't hurt constantly after a while. So that's one of the main things. Mental health, again, we still do a pretty poor job, I think, especially within the diaspora, of dealing with things like mental health. Like you heard with Eve's parents, is very much like, you don't take your problems outside of the family or outside of the community. You don't talk to professionals. You don't air the business out. You pray, you fast, you'll be fine. And no, there is comfort in that for a lot of people, but it's still an illness or illnesses or disorders or whatever it is. And I wanted it to make it clear that there's no shame in seeking outside help if you need it. And there's also, it doesn't look the same for everybody. So that's why I just kind of wanted to keep things a bit vague and nebulous when describing Quentin, because I feel like people always want a name and they want, clear symptoms, and they want to be able to nail that down, and sometimes you can't. So
yeah. I did. Yeah. Okay. I was gonna give a spoiler, but yes. Sorry.
But I think that's a really nice point to leave it at, and I think that sums up like the title of the book, like Someday Maybe.
Yeah. Absolutely. And before we leave you, Onyi, could you tell us a little bit about your writers' retreat?
Oh, sure. So I run a writers' retreat for Black women and femmes. It's called Black Pens. We had our inaugural one this July on the 2 hottest days of the year over in Berkshire, at a place called Wasting Estate. It was a huge success. I also try and make it as accessible as I can and give scholarship spots where I can as well. I'm planning the one for next year, and this website, it's black-pens.com and black_pens on Twitter. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to know about that, just follow those handles and it'll give me a shout.
Brilliant. Amazing. I just want to obviously say thank you from the Nile Book Club. So big thank you to Onyi.
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. That's so sweet.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, the rules are simple. It is an African literary quiz, so all the questions are around African authors or African literature or writers that have written about Africa. So don't worry if you're not as knowledgeable, it's fine. Now is the chance to be knowledgeable. Jennifer Nantubuga Makumbi's debut novel, Chintu, charts ill-fated descendants of a Buganda chief. But what UK-based, multi-hyphenated creative was personally handpicked by the author to narrate the audible version of the book? Is it A, Kalungi Sebandeke, B, Daniel Kaluuya, C, Arnold Ocheng, D, Sheila Atim?
Thank you so much to the book club. I had a great time. I won the quiz and I got an amazing book that I'm looking forward to reading. So thank you so much for creating this space. I look forward to the next one. Bye.
It was amazing. I think everyone should come to Nile Book Club and experience about different types of books. It was amazing. That's what I can say.